All right, let's dive in. We're going deep into the mind of Charles T. Munger today.
The man behind the curtain at Berkshire Hathaway, right? Alongside Warren Buffett.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our guidebook.
Yeah.
Excerpts from Poor Charlie's Almanack.
That collection of wisdom, wit, and straight talk.
The one and only. We're going to unpack his investment strategies.
Those mental models he's always talking about.
Oh, and some surprising life lessons along the way.
Should be a fascinating journey. You know, there's this story in the book.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's about Munger and how he almost became a multimillionaire.
Almost? What happened?
You see, this thing called deprival super reaction syndrome got in the way.
Deprival, I'm not familiar with that one.
He tells this story about Belridge Oil. He had a chance to buy more stock when it was dirt cheap, like $19 a share.
And he didn't.
He hesitated. That's the syndrome at play. See, we humans hate losing more than we love winning.
Loss aversion. It's hardwired, isn't it?
Exactly. So even Munger, brilliant as he is, gets tripped up by his own psychology.
So he was so worried about missing a possible gain.
He missed the bigger picture. The kicker. Belridge Oil got bought by Shell. Forget this. $3,700 a share.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
Imagine the what-ifs. It's a powerful lesson about recognizing our own biases.
How they affect our decisions. Everyday ones, too, not just investing.
It makes you think sometimes the best move is to walk away.
Even if it feels like you're on the cusp of a big win.
Right. Okay, but how do we avoid falling into that same trap?
Yeah. How do we recognize these biases in ourselves and make better choices?
Awareness is key. Munger's big on understanding human psychology.
Not just for investing, but for life in general.
You got it. Once you see those emotional triggers,
You can step back and be more objective. Makes sense.
he's got this idea of mental models, which ties in here.
Oh, yeah, he's always talking about building a lattice work of them.
Exactly. Drawing from multiple disciplines, psychology, history, physics, anything.
Gives you a fuller picture, helps you make better decisions.
Like having different lenses to see the world through instead of just one.
I like that analogy. It reminds me, Munger's really big on lifelong learning.
Practical wisdom, that's his thing. He loved biographies, especially Benjamin Franklin.
He was a voracious reader. His kids even joked that he was, what was it, a book with a couple of legs sticking out?
Something like that, haha. But how does all that reading turn into action?
Right, how do you go from book smarts to street smarts?
Well, for Munger, it's about taking core principles from different fields, applying them to real life.
Okay, so he worked at his grandfather's grocery store early on.
That's right. Learned about hard work, discipline, understanding customers.
And those basic lessons set him up for later success.
Absolutely. They instilled practicality, focus on getting things done, and fundamentals of business.
But it wasn't just about hard work. Munger is known for taking calculated risks.
Challenging conventional wisdom, too. Remember the story of Munger's Folly?
That boat design project.
Yeah. He built this huge catamaran with all these unconventional features.
A lot of people thought he was nuts.
But he wasn't afraid to experiment, to learn from his mistakes.
So even a brilliant mind like his embraces the possibility of failure.
Exactly. It's reassuring, isn't it? Speaking of challenging conventions, there's his iron prescription.
For avoiding ideological extremism, right? Don't have an opinion unless you can argue the other side better than your opponents can.
He's saying, don't be a parrot. Understand the nuances, the counter-arguments, the whole picture before you form an opinion.
It's like an antidote to confirmation bias.
Right. So instead of surrounding yourself with people who agree with you,
Seek out different perspectives
you
actively.
know, that's what Munger advocates. It's about challenging your assumptions.
Expanding your understanding, reaching more balanced conclusions.
And it ties in perfectly with his multidisciplinary approach.
Can't truly get something complex if you only look at it from one angle.
This reminds me of a story he tells about Thomas Hunt Morgan, the biologist.
Okay, what did he do?
Morgan banned calculators from his biology department.
No, calculators. Why?
He believed that truly grasping the fundamentals was way more important than relying on complex calculations.
So he was all about the big picture, the big nuggets of wisdom.
Exactly. True expertise comes from the core principles, not getting lost in unnecessary complexity.
And this applies to anything, not just investing.
It does. So Munger is about mastering the basics, but also adapting, challenging the status quo.
Sounds like a winning combo. But how does all this translate into his investment philosophy?
Well, it boils down to human behavior and how it drives markets. Remember that cost plus percentage of cost contract?
The one that backfired.
That's the one. Because of the messed up incentives it created?
It's like a case study in how good intentions can go wrong.
If you don't get the incentive, incentives are powerful. Munger calls them a superpower.
They can drive behavior in ways you don't expect.
He says you got to design systems that encourage good actions, discourage bad ones.
In business, investing, even everyday life.
So it's not just being smart, it's understanding the human element, the why behind people's actions.
That's where the psychology deep dive comes in.
Absolutely. Speaking of markets, Munger is skeptical of the efficient market theory.
Most investors accept that the market is always right, at least in the long run.
But Munger sees inefficiencies that smart investors can exploit.
So finding those mispriced bets.
The hidden gems everyone else has overlooked. And when he finds one, he goes all in.
So it's about patience, research, and going against the grain.
He's looking for undervalued companies, solid fundamentals that he can hold for the long haul.
It's a concentrated approach, not the usual diversified portfolio.
Right. And that brings us back to lifelong learning.
You got to be reading, researching, refining your understanding constantly to spot those opportunities.
Munger is always learning, expanding his models, challenging his assumptions.
The pursuit of wisdom never ends. His vast reading really shaped his perspective, didn't it?
It did. So it's not just about being a good investor, but a well-rounded person.
Someone who's always learning, always growing. This has been fascinating so far.
It has. What stood out to you the most?
For me, it's Munger's focus on connecting the dots. It's not enough to just know stuff.
You got to see how ideas from different areas relate to each other. That's where the lattice work of mental models comes in.
We'll be unpacking that more later on.
Absolutely. We'll look at how he uses these models to make better decisions.
Avoid common traps, navigate a complex world. Looking forward to that.
Me too. It'll be fascinating to see how his thinking can help us become more effective thinkers, better decision makers.
And ultimately, live more fulfilling lives.
You know, one thing that really jumps out from poor Charlie's Almanack,
What's that?
it's how Munger dives into these quirks of human psychology.
Oh, yeah, he doesn't just list them off.
He explains how they can combine and create these crazy outcomes.
He calls them Lollapalooza effects, right?
Exactly. Things that catch us totally off guard. He even points out some of the darker sides of human nature.
Like what?
Envy, resentment, even twisting facts to fit our own narrative.
So even the best of us are prone to these biases.
He argues it's especially important to watch out for this in fields like finance and law.
Why those fields?
Because the incentives can get so out of whack. He actually coined this term, embezzlement.
Embezzlement. I've never heard that one.
It describes actions that are technically legal but morally iffy.
Ah, those gray areas.
Where you might be tempted to bend the rules, even if you're not breaking them.
He's saying we need to be mindful of this, not just in others, but in ourselves.
We can all fall prey to our own biases. It's so easy to do.
Makes me think of the Persian messenger syndrome he talks about.
Oh yeah, the tendency to shoot the messenger bearing bad news.
Classic example of emotions overriding logic.
It happens all the time in organizations. People are scared to speak up.
To challenge things because they fear the consequences.
Creates a culture of silence where problems just fester.
Until they explode into full-blown crises.
Right. Munger says we need environments where people feel safe to speak truth to power.
To point out flaws, even if it's uncomfortable.
You need a culture of intellectual honesty.
Where people are rewarded for bringing up tough issues, not punished.
It takes leadership that values diverse views and critical thinking.
But even with the best intentions, we can slip up, right?
Absolutely. Munger talks about excessive self-regard tendency.
Meaning, we overestimate our abilities and underestimate our weaknesses.
We all know someone who thinks they're the smartest person in the room.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Overconfidence, bad decisions, unwillingness to admit mistakes.
It's a familiar pattern.
Munger stresses self-awareness. Recognizing our limits is the first step.
Being open to feedback, even when it's tough to hear.
There's that great quote, "It is remarkable how much long-term advantage people like us have gotten by trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent."
Love that one.
Yeah.
It's about avoiding those unforced errors.
Playing the long game, making smart choices consistently, letting compounding do its work.
So not about being a genius, but being consistently rational.
Avoiding blunders, making small improvements over time.
Which brings us back to lifelong learning. Munger is always seeking knowledge.
Expanding his models, refining his view of the world, he encourages us to be intellectually curious.
Read widely. to study the lives of great founders from history,
He sees history as this huge source of wisdom.
full of lessons that apply to today and tomorrow.
He's also big on objectivity, detaching from emotions, analyzing rationally.
Like his concept of sitting on your ass investing,
Yes, it's about discipline, resisting impulses, thinking long-term.
making decisions based on solid principles, not fleeting feelings.
In investing, as in life, patience and rationality often win over brilliance and speed.
It's clear Munger gets human psychology, sees the flaws in our thinking.
But he doesn't just point them out. He offers solutions
He gives us a framework for making better decisions.
for avoiding those common traps, for living a better life.
Poor Charlie's Almanack is like this guidebook to worldly wisdom.
Practical advice that you can use anywhere, delivered with wit and humor.
It's surprisingly fun to read, even when the topics are complex.
It's like he's saying, here's what I learned, often the hard way. Take it and use it.
What strikes me is his humility, always willing to admit what he doesn't know.
And encouraging others to do the same.
He gets it. Recognizing your limits is the first step to overcoming them.
And he's so generous with his knowledge, sharing it freely.
Hoping others will benefit. Oh, okay, we've talked psychology, lifelong learning.
You mentioned mental models earlier. Can we dive into that more?
Yeah, what are they exactly and how do they work?
Think of it like a mental toolbox filled with different frameworks, principles.
From all sorts of disciplines.
Exactly. You start seeing the world differently with these models.
Spotting patterns, making connections you might have missed before.
Like having different lenses to see things through,
Yeah.
each giving you a unique perspective.
Munger argues that building this lattice work of mental models
Makes us better thinkers, better decision makers.
helps us live more fulfilling lives. But where do we even begin?
Munger draws from all over. Physics, biology, history, psychology.
So you need to be a bit of a polymath, a jack of all trades when it comes to knowledge.
You got it. He's big on psychology because, like we said, understanding people is crucial.
He sees how emotions and biases mess with our judgment.
Lead us to make irrational choices. And history. It's a guidebook.
Full of lessons about human nature, repeating patterns.
Right, even physics. Understanding the fundamental laws that govern everything.
He sees connections between the physical world and human behavior.
Underlying principles that apply to both. It's pretty mind-blowing.
So psychology, history, physics. What else?
Biology to understand things like adaptation, evolution.
The world is always changing.
Those who adapt thrive, those who cling to old ways, well,
Go extinct, like the dinosaurs. Survival of the fittest applied to business and life.
exactly. And even philosophy.
What does he get from that?
Understanding ethics, values, principles. He believes integrity is key for lasting success.
Not just making money, but being a good person, having strong morals.
That's core to his philosophy. By drawing from all these fields,
Building this tapestry of mental models.
we become more versatile thinkers, approaching problems from multiple angles.
Finding creative solutions. That's the power of a multidisciplinary mind.
It does sound like a lot of work, though. Where do you even start?
Yeah, that's a lot to take in.
Well, Munger's a big fan of reading widely.
Engaging with different perspectives, challenging your own assumptions.
Always be learning, refining your understanding of the world. That's the key.
But how do you know which mental models are the most important?
That's the million-dollar question, and one we'll explore as we go deeper.
Okay, good to know. Before we move on,
Sure.
I want to go back to Munger's investment philosophy.
What about it?
You said he's skeptical of the efficient market theory.
That the market always prices things correctly.
Right. Can you unpack that a bit more? How does he approach investing differently?
He believes the market often gets it wrong. That creates opportunities.
For patient, disciplined investors.
Right. And his approach, it's very different from the usual diversification strategy.
So he's okay with going against the crowd.
If he has a good reason, absolutely. He's a contrarian thinker, but not reckless.
He does his research, assesses the risks.
Always make sure he has a margin of safety built in.
Sounds like a tough balance to strike.
It is. It takes a deep understanding of the market and human psychology.
Because emotions drive so much of market behavior, right?
Exactly. Munger's identified all these cognitive biases that can trip investors up.
Things like overconfidence, anchoring, the availability heuristic.
It's like our brains are wired to make bad investment choices sometimes.
Sounds about right.
He says if we understand these biases in ourselves and others,
We can become more rational investors.
making decisions based on logic and evidence, not fear and greed.
So it's about mastering your emotions
Being aware of those mental shortcuts our brains love to take.
and making conscious, deliberate choices.
Yes. Which brings us back to that strong mental framework
The lattice work of models.
that can help us navigate the market and make good decisions.
Makes sense. But Munger isn't just about numbers, is he?
No, not at all.
He's got this strong ethical side, too.
Integrity is fundamental to him. He believes it's key for lasting success.
Not just in business, but in life, too.
He talks about building a reputation for trustworthiness, honesty,
It's like he's saying, your character is your most valuable asset.
and he walks the walk, known for running his businesses ethically.
Avoiding even the slightest hint of wrongdoing.
It's about doing the right thing, even when no one's watching,
That's the real test of integrity.
and it's something we can all aspire to.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. Munger's approach to everything is fascinating.
He challenges us to think differently, question everything, and always keep improving.
But we've just scratched the surface, right?
We have. We still need to go deeper into those mental models.
And how to build our own lattice work.
That's where the real fun begins. Understanding and applying these models.
Can help us reach our potential, make better choices, navigate the world with more confidence.
Ready to upgrade your mental toolbox?
Let's do it. You know, through all these Munger discussions,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about his focus on rationality.
It's a recurring theme, for sure.
It's like he's saying, emotions are part of us, but...
It shouldn't be in the driver's seat.
Especially for those big life decisions.
He doesn't want us to become robots, though.
Right. Not emotionless.
More like recognizing when our feelings might be leading us down the wrong path.
That self-awareness to catch our own biases.
Exactly. And remember his iron prescription to avoid ideological extremism.
Oh yeah, where you have to argue the other side better than they can.
It's like a mental gym for rationality.
It really is. It forces you to see things from a different perspective.
To grapple with those different viewpoints
Stops you from just seeking out information that confirms what you already believe.
gets you out of your echo chamber.
Into a place where you can actually learn and grow.
Exactly. And it builds humility, too.
Admitting you don't have all the answers.
Knowing there's always more to learn. And speaking of humility, Munger himself is incredibly self-aware.
Oh yeah, he readily admits his own shortcomings.
Encourages others to do the same. Remember that story? When he criticized California's Proposition 13?
And got a ton of negative feedback.
People were shocked by his stance.
What was it he said about Warren Buffett's reaction?
Something like, it's hard to shock Warren. He's past 70, he's seen a lot, and his brain works quickly.
Classic Munger. He doesn't sweat the negativity, just keeps moving forward.
And it shows the strength of their bond, too. Been partners for so long.
Decades. You can really sense that mutual respect.
For the other's intelligence, judgment.
It's fascinating how they work together.
They both have strong opinions, but
They challenge each other without taking it personally.
like they've got their own mental models for collaboration.
And for handling disagreements.
Yeah.
It's a winning formula.
It certainly is. But it's not just about smarts and collaboration.
There's a shared commitment to ethical behavior, too.
Munger is adamant about running things with integrity.
No cutting corners, no shady stuff.
He even uses that term embezzlement, right?
For actions that are legal, but still ethically questionable.
Like he's saying, just because you can do something,
Doesn't mean you should.
it's about holding yourself to a higher standard.
Even when it's hard. Which reminds me of another Munger principle.
Which one?
That you should deserve what you want.
Sounds simple.
But it's really deep. Like, if you focus on being worthy of success,
On truly providing value to the world,
the rewards will come naturally.
don't chase success. Become the kind of person it's attracted to.
That's powerful. It applies to any goal you have in life.
It does. And it requires continuous learning, adapting, evolving.
Munger's a perfect example. He's a lifelong learner, always evolving.
Always soaking up new knowledge, like that book with a couple of legs sticking out.
His kids nailed that description. And he wants us all to cultivate that curiosity.
It enriches your life.
Makes you a more interesting person, someone who can contribute more.
Challenge assumptions, make a positive impact.
So we've explored Munger's mind,
His unique way of thinking.
his insights into psychology, his hunger for knowledge.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's your biggest takeaway?
For me, it's the focus on building that lattice work of mental models.
Finding those key principles from all these different fields.
That can help you make smarter decisions, solve problems, and live a better life.
It's a powerful framework.
And that's the challenge Munger leaves us with. Huh? What would be in your lattice work? What can you learn from his approach?
It's definitely worth reflecting on. Poor Charlie's Almanack is full of wisdom.
It's a journey worth taking for sure.
If you're ready to explore Munger's world,
I highly recommend checking out the book for yourself. It's an investment that keeps on giving.